Welcome everyone to our latest presentation of Ignatian Moments here at Gesu Parish in downtown Milwaukee. I'm Father Jim Flaherty, pastor of Gesu. What I'd like to do in the brief time we have this morning is to present a little bit on the Society of Jesus and the call to justice. Many people who are familiar with the Society of Jesus know that the call to justice, and especially social justice, has been constitutive of what we do in our various ministries. And so that will be our topic for today, the inception of this emphasis on justice. Where did it emerge from? Of course, Jesuits from the very beginning of the society were caring for the needy and the poor and the afflicted. But the emphasis on justice became central to the society around the year 1970. Now, if you think of the years 1970s, 1960s, preceding them, they were times of toil and turmoil, I should say, and unrest, much as like we're experiencing sadly today with the recent incidents in Minneapolis, the killing of George Floyd, and Georgia as well, Ahmaud Arbery, has raised the ugly head of racism in our country and the question of racial justice. And so for the Society of Jesus, a little background to this emergence of justice as an emphasis in all our ministries. You recall the Second Vatican Council, 1963, 1965, roughly. One of the central documents of that council, Gaudium et Spes, or the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, was when the Church really opened itself to the world in order to serve the world in its needs. And at the beginning of that document, very powerful line or sentence says the following: "The joy and hope, the grief and anguish of the men and women of our time, especially of those who are poor or afflicted in any way, are the joy and hope, the grief and anguish of the followers of Christ as well." The joy and hope, the grief and anguish of the people of the modern world are the joy and hope and anguish of those who follow Christ. A startling declaration of the Church seeking to be in service, especially of those who are poor and afflicted. Right around that time, Second Vatican Council, Father Pedro Arrupe, a Spanish Jesuit, is elected as the Superior General or the leader of the Society of Jesus. His time as leader or superior of the as Superior General of the Society would extend from 1965 to 1983. But before we get to Arrupe, in 1971, so this is when Arrupe is the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, a gathering of bishops in Latin America, a synod of bishops, met in Rome in 1971 and produced a document called Justice in the World. And this is what the bishops had to say at this gathering in Rome. Action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as a constitutive dimension of the Church's mission. Action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as a constitutive dimension of the Church's mission. Not something peripheral to the Church's mission, but central to the mission of the Church. This leads in to a famous address that Father Arrupe, when he was Superior General of the Society, gave in 1973, entitled Men and Women for Others. You will know that phrase very well if you have participated with Jesuits in their various ministries, whether in education or parish ministry or retreat ministry. Men and Women for Others has become a mantra, almost a cliche among those who join us in our various works of ministry. But he was addressing a group of alumni of Jesuit institutions of learning, and he was asking the question, Has justice been a central element in your education? And Arupe said, quite startlingly, he said, no, we have not emphasized justice in our institutions of education. But now, with the background that I have presented, Arupe was calling the society to begin to emphasize justice as, again, constitutive of our mission in the Society of Jesus. So what kind of justice was Arupe alluding to? Not so much personal or individual justice, just justice between two people. Do I treat you fairly or unfairly? Rather, the justice he appealed to was what he called, and others have called, structural justice. Structural justice, he wrote, is our customs, our social and economic and political systems, our commercial relations in general, the institutions that we have created for ourselves, insofar as they have injustice built into them, are the concrete forms in which sin is objectified. So justice and injustice is not simply something personal or individual. It has a corporate dimension, a structural, a social dimension. It gets embedded in the customs and the practices and the policies of a given society. And those structures or those systems then begin to oppress unjustly those that it wishes to oppress or exclude. So this notion of structural justice is what many people, minorities, people of color, are appealing to when they are demonstrating, hopefully, peacefully. They are appealing to structures that have oppressed them, that have not respected their basic human dignity. And you can think about some of those structures that exist in our own society. They're not hard to find. So who is the person that is going to work on behalf of those who are oppressed? Well, Arupe famously called them men and women for others. Not men and women for themselves, but for others, and especially for the poor and the afflicted and the unjustly treated. Beings for ourselves, beings for themselves, are a hallmark of egoism. By thus making egoism a way of life, Arupe wrote in this address, Men and Women for Others, we translate it, we objectify it in social structures. So the idea of Jesuit education and Jesuit ministry in general is to create an environment where those who participate in our various ministries and whom we serve can have their consciousness raised, to become those men and women for others, aware of those social structures that oppress others, denying them their basic human dignity. Arupe went on to conclude that he was seeking men and women completely convinced that love of God, which does not issue injustice for others, is a farce. It's a very strong statement. That the Jesuits in their various ministries would help foster and transform men and women completely convinced that the love of God, which does not issue injustice for others, is a farce. And so we see through this historical, brief as it has been, and this topic is immense, this historical portrayal of how justice became so central to the Society of Jesus. The General Congregation, this is a meeting of all Jesuits. This is 1974, 1975. So 1971 is that Synod. 1973 is the essay, Men and Women for Others. 1974 and 75, the whole society gathers. And it creates documents to help guide it in its various ministries. And one of the documents, Decree 4, famously declared that the mission of the Society of Jesus today is the service of faith, of which the promotion of justice is an absolute requirement. For reconciliation with God demands the reconciliation of people with one another. The reconciliation with God demands the reconciliation of people with one another. So that promotion of justice, again, becomes constitutive of what it means to be a disciple of Christ, what it means to be a believer, what it means to be a Christian and a Catholic. And we work for that reconciliation, and certainly we find that need for reconciliation paramount in our current crisis. Just by way of conclusion, how this emphasis on justice played out post-Arupe and post-General Congregation 32. For example, during Arupe's own time was created the Jesuit Refugee Service, JRS, which serves refugees throughout the world. Also was created, I'm not sure if this was in Arupe's time, probably was, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. These are volunteers who put aside a year, or dedicate, I should say, a year or two in their lives to specifically serve those who have been afflicted, the poor, the anguished, those who've been unjustly treated. Largely they're college graduates. We recently graduated from college who spend a year or two volunteering time throughout the world. The Kino Border Initiative, KBI, is a binational organization that works in the area of immigration and is located in Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico. I actually served that organization for several months a few summers ago. It exists right on the border between Mexico and the United States, and it serves those migratory peoples who are coming north and trying to serve them and their needs as best as possible, and also to advocate for justice for all. And finally, I would mention the Ignatian Solidarity Network, which currently exists to advocate for justice on a whole variety of topics in our current day, the Ignatian Solidarity Network. So those are some extensions of this invitation or call to justice that really was initiated by Father Arupe and is so firmly allied to that key phrase in Jesuit institutions about becoming men and women for others. So we pray that we who follow in the path of Christ might indeed embrace that call to be men and women for others by practicing justice so that peace might prevail.